This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. Reading is very important. Wisdom and knowledge come from life experience, while information gathering comes from reading. People who are well-read are generally more interesting to talk to and have much broader range of depth than those who never read hardly anything. There has been a loss of reading skills in recent decades and a decline in classical literature. Many people in modernity won't even read this essay, or a magazine article, or a fluffy fun book, or a book of fiction, or a book of nonfiction, let alone a book of knowledge such as an ancient philosophical text or grimoire. Thus, our insane clown president, Trumpelstiltskin, is the 45th Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, and the comedy Idiocracy has become a documentary. The story with that goes deeper, so stay tuned for future essay deconstructions on the subject. Which is understandable since we're so programmed to move a mile a minute and not ever slow down. Reading takes time and requires one to take one's time and slow down. In order to be a good writer, you must read a ton more than you write. It's baffling how unwell-read many creators are, and a huge part of being a filmmaker, for example, instead of just a person with a camera, is writing compelling, fleshed-out characters and stories of depth. Hence, so much of the problem with, let's say, indie filmmaking is a lack of good writing, even though we've all heard the quote, "The three things needed to make a good film are a good script, and a good script." Technology has made it so we get information a mile a minute. Sadly, most of it's crap because people seem to want to play app-based games on their conflict mineral made, slave labor constructed, ovarian cancer generating, NSA spying enabled cell phones, rather than just read something juicy and yummy for their mind in analog on physical or tangible paper. Some of the best, if not the very best, information one can consume on the page or sometimes the screen comes not so much from words, but even more symbols of knowledge. Usually ancient books, or else books which retell or reboot those old themes, contain those items. In terms of time, for example, The Art of War is not an easy book to read, but instead something that requires one to spend time with it over and over again over long periods. Much like a course, or let's say something that is of university study, it can take a long time to sit down with The Art of War and really get information out of it. And that requires not only that slowing down, but also focused mental concentration. So there's no coincidence in social networking inspiring heavy amounts of mental discursiveness, in which the youth of a nation have been bred to pack onto the next thing, onto the next thing, onto the next thing, which is horrible for concentration, focus, as well as the esoteric ability to retain internal light. As someone who is mildly dyslexic, reading in the past had been a struggle for this writer. The McDonald's for the Mind B+ level accurate Wikipedia definition of dyslexia is difficulty in learning to read or interpret words, which sure as shit was true for this brain's real estate. When going through the 12 years in the mind control conformed boot camp of public school, I would have so much problem remembering what I had just gone over a paragraph or two before. This mainly popped up when reading fiction, whereas being a very visual person, I would often lose place and time within the story, making it difficult to always know when and where I was in the story. However, it wasn't so much of the information in the text itself, but more the process of extracting the details of that off the page and into memory. It always felt a bit analogous to gears lodged in mental cogs. However, being read the very same text out loud was a different story. That's why bedtime stories oftentimes appeal to young minds in order to get them interested in then eventually reading themselves. And an extension of that is that books on tape then later saved me personally in the 80s and 90s. But there was only a limited smaller percentage of content which had been read and recorded at that time-space vector. When reading, it involves all your time while doing that process. Listening does not. When you listen, you are in your own little world and can oftentimes do other things. I always have earbuds in my ears whenever by myself in my spare time. Whether I'm out and about getting chores done, exercising, working in the yard, doing various hobbies, etc. Either at home or on the move, if alone and don't have earbuds in my ear holes, it feels as though something is missing. Leaving the house without the trifecta of wallet, keys, and oftentimes, sadly, because of technology today, the phone, with earbuds in, causes a sensation of being partially nude. If you are similar and are constantly plugged in on your own time, with headphones constantly attached, AirTube headphones are recommended to research for their health benefits. A large percentage of electromagnetic frequency radiation from your phone travels up your headphone wire into its speakers. These earbud headphones have the headphone itself partially up the wire and thus keep the small amount of microradiation emitting from your battery-powered device away from your head, which is important because these devices do not have our health as their primary concern. Time is valuable and life is short. When around others, being respectful by not staring down at your pecking device of your short-form texts on the black scrying screen of your phone, and instead giving them your focus to engage with interest and eye contact is very important. Wisdom comes from places you never suspect, and face-to-face wisdom is the yummiest of all. Our spare time is best spent taking in healthy and good-tasting information directly from sources of experience. Life is too short, and to actually spend all your time not so much meeting others, but to only listen to someone else's pre-approved menu, which they would be all too happy to spoon-feed you over some ghastly live broadcast full of deplorable corporate commercials, is not going to get you there. And of course, I'm allowed to say that as someone who has occasionally directed commercials and has worked in and out of the commercial industry. Audiobooks and podcasts are much more ubiquitous these days. Even though we can go further than reading, the beginning of mysticism is more or less the end of reading, for example, we generally need to be very well read before we can get to the stage of direct gnosis, because you get out of an experience what you've previously put into it. Many old texts are packed with excellence, yet have not been transcribed to an audiobook. The modern version of books on tape is the spoken word version of text on the page, either read by human or translated digitally into an audio file, just like a book on tape. This is a technique called text-to-speech, which is an absolute secret weapon of excellence. Older versions of the Amazon Kindle, for example, allowed most, if not all, books you purchased on Kindle to also be transcribed as an audiobook. An outstanding feature, which they very sneakily and quietly removed in later versions, to my understanding, because of conflicts with publishing companies over copyright of the audiobooks versus the traditional books. It's also probably some way that Jeff Bezos can make an extra $100,000 every 10 seconds. The best solution I have found on a computer to mimic this is text-to-speech. There are pieces of software which allow you to copy text and have it read out to you, often, but not always, by a robotic Stephen Hawking-like voice. For numerous years, I would highlight text and copy it into a reader and push play. The day this was discovered was truly life-transformative, as it allowed for the world to open up to new heights which I had always struggled to achieve in the past. So much to the point where I knew my grade point average in school would have been better if that technology was around in my high school and university years. So even though the trivium education system has been intentionally removed from modern schooling because schooling is not education, it's still a beautiful time to educate yourself through reading with greater ease due to the ability to have this technology at your fingertips. Even though they are a giant centralized behemoth worth literally $1 trillion and continue to lower the payout percentage their App Store developers receive because they apparently still aren't happy with their profit margins, I will, believe it or not, give some credit to Apple and mention that in more recent versions of the Mac OS operating system, they have had an increasingly great feature where you can simply highlight any text within the operating system, no separate piece of software required, be it full prose on a single article or even entire novel, then right-click on it and highlight text and say Add to iTunes as spoken track. And after a short bit, boom, you've got an audio file that's essentially an audiobook, created quickly from any text you can copy from. Alchemical mind gold. A life-changing process for the autodidact, which we will all one day come to be. Being used to listening to self-created audio files, you can then incorporate a time-saving technique of listening to them at faster speed. A must-have crucial feature for audio playback software and for any video playback software worth its weight in gold. Music requires being listened to at a proper speed, but a human being's voice does not. In fact, most people's voice-speech patterns have caused them to deliver oral information quite inefficiently and work better sped up a bit. Rather than spending 1, 2, 3 hours listening to that latest podcast episode at speed, try it at 1.5 times speed, or even twice the speed. It does vary based upon how fast the certain person speaks, but you'll get just as much out of it in much more efficient of a time frame. This process will allow your yummy sponging intel ratio to increase daily, where you can obviously take in more information in less time. It also works really well on mediocre films, such as kind of boring documentaries or Asian action films, whereas the dialogue just doesn't carry the visuals. Like all muscles, mental process requires exercise, and building up your ability to listen quicker will rapidly move you from becoming more Jedi and less Muggle in no time.